A mountain man lifts a blanket, and his blood runs cold. He thought he was saving a stranger from the snow. But when she whispered, "Please don't touch me," his whole world stopped cold as the storm outside. She's not just hurt. She's hiding a scar burned into her skin by the very men sworn to protect her. And now soldiers are hunting them both, calling her a fugitive and him a kidnapper. In a land where mercy is rarer than gold, a broken woman and a lonely man are forced to trust each other, or freeze alone. But when he dares to lift that blanket again, what he finds isn't just pain. It's a secret that could damn them both, or save them. As the mountains close in and bullets echo through the pass, can a man who's lost his faith touch a soul the world has already destroyed and bring her back to life? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The storm had been crawling down from the ridges since dawn, a gray sheet swallowing the mountains one pine at a time. Caden Boone pulled his coat tighter and leaned into the wind. Snow stung his cheeks, and the world around him was little more than white and wind. His trapline ran 3 miles through the timber, and he meant to check it before the drifts made travel near impossible. The wind howled like a soul in pain. He'd lived alone in those mountains for 7 winters and knew the language of the weather, the whisper before a storm, the warning that came when the sky turned the color of iron. He should have turned back long ago, but hunger pushed him forward. His stores were low, and the rabbit traps were his best hope. When he reached the ravine where the creek cut through the snow, his horse stopped short. Caden's eyes followed the animal's snort and saw a dark hump at the bottom of the slope. For a moment, he thought it was a dead mule. Then he saw the outline of a wagon tipped sideways against a boulder. Its tarp was half torn, its wheels half buried. He climbed down, boots crunching in the snow, and made his way to the wreck. The air was sharp enough to cut breath. He expected to find cold bodies, maybe a trader who'd lost his team in the storm. But when he lifted the torn canvas, he froze. Underneath lay a woman. Her face was pale as moonlight, her lashes rimmed with frost. Her hands, bare and bloodless, clutched a shredded blanket. For 1 second, he thought she was gone. Then her lips moved. "Please." Her voice was dry, more breath than sound. "Please, don't touch me." Caden's heart lurched. She was alive. "I won't hurt you," he said softly. His voice came out rough, the sound of a man unused to speaking. "You're froze near to death, miss. I gotta get you warm." The woman tried to shrink back, but her body wouldn't obey. He saw terror in her eyes, even through the frost. He didn't know what had happened to her, but something inside him, a quiet, stubborn decency, wouldn't let him walk away. He pulled off his buffalo coat and wrapped it around her small frame. Her skin felt like ice beneath the fabric. Lifting her carefully, he carried her up the slope. She weighed little more than a sack of meal. His horse shifted under the sudden burden. Caden mounted behind her, holding her steady without touching more than her shoulders. The wind bit at his face as he turned toward his cabin, 3 miles through heavy snow. Each step of the horse sank deep, but he kept whispering to it. Soft words of encouragement, the kind you speak when there's no one else left to listen. Twice he thought she'd slipped away, her head lolling against his arm. But each time, when he leaned close, he could hear a faint breath. "You hang on," he murmured. "Ain't but a little farther now." The snow thickened. Trees loomed like shadows. By the time they reached his cabin, dusk had already swallowed the sky. Smoke rose weakly from the chimney where he'd left coals banked that morning. Caden carried her inside, shouldering the door shut against the wind. The cabin was small but sturdy. A single room with a stove, a cot, and a table. He laid her near the fire, peeled away the frozen blanket, and fetched water to warm. She moaned softly, twisting as he cut away ice-stiff sleeves. Her skin was blue with cold. He worked quickly, rubbing warmth back into her hands, but every time his fingers brushed her skin, she flinched. "Easy," he whispered. "Ain't nobody gonna hurt you." He found one of his wool shirts and slipped it over her head while keeping his eyes turned aside. When he pulled the quilt over her, she began to breathe more evenly. The color started to creep back into her cheeks. Caden sat beside the stove, listening to the wind claw at the roof. He poured a tin cup of broth from the pot that hung over the coals. When she stirred again, he held it to her lips. "Here, drink slow." She obeyed, weakly at first, then her eyes fluttered open. They were gray, clear even through fever. "Where am I?" she whispered. "My cabin, up the south ridge." Her gaze moved around the dim room, then back to him. "You found me." "I reckon so." A tear slid from the corner of her eye, freezing before it reached her chin. "I didn't think anyone would." He didn't know what to say, so he nodded once and stirred the fire. Hours passed. Outside, the storm screamed against the windows. Inside, the only sound was the crackle of wood and her shallow breathing. Caden watched her sleep, the lines of her face softening. She looked no older than 30, maybe younger. Her hair was tangled with snow and dirt, yet he could see she'd once been cared for. Her hands fine-boned, her speech not rough like mountain folk. He turned his attention to the rifle propped by the door, checked the chamber, then hung his coat to dry. He'd lived through blizzards, floods, and worse, but this night carried a different weight. Something about the woman's voice, broken, pleading, still echoed in his ears. "Don't touch me." He couldn't stop hearing it. When morning came, pale light fell across the cabin floor. The storm had passed, leaving the world buried in silence. Caden stepped outside, stretched stiff limbs, and looked toward the valley. Snow lay deep enough to hide a wagon hole. No sign of tracks, no sign of men. Whoever she'd traveled with hadn't survived, or hadn't wanted to be found. He brought in more firewood and checked on her. She slept, face flushed from fever. He poured fresh water into a tin bowl, soaked a cloth, and laid it on her forehead. She stirred but didn't wake. By noon she began to mumble. Words came and went between breaths. "Captain, don't, please." Her head turned side to side, the movement frantic. Caden knelt beside her, unsure what to do. "You're safe," he said quietly. "Ain't no captain here, just me." The words didn't reach her. He sat back on his heels and watched her tremble. When dusk came, he decided to check her arm. The sleeve was stiff with dried blood from some earlier wound. He hesitated, not wanting to shame her, but fever could kill as fast as cold. Carefully, he lifted the blanket. His blood ran cold. Across her shoulder and down her back were scars, long, deep welts from a whip. Some old, some new. And branded above her shoulder blade were 2 letters burned deep into the flesh. U.S. Caden drew back, jaw tightening. He'd seen many marks in his years, Indian brands, prison tattoos, but never this. Whoever had done it had meant to claim her like property. He pulled the blanket back over her shoulders and sat in silence. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from fury. When she woke near midnight, the fever had eased. Her eyes found him sitting at the table. "You saw," she whispered. He nodded once. "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "Don't tell anyone." "I don't aim to tell a soul," he said. "But I'll ask you plain, who did that?" Her gaze drifted to the fire. "The army," he frowned. "Why?" "Because I spoke the truth," she said, "and they called it treason." She turned her face to the wall. He didn't press her. Not yet. The pain in her voice told him enough. When morning came again, the light seemed kinder. Caden boiled water for coffee and reheated broth. She ate a little and thanked him softly. Her voice still trembled, but the edge of fear had dulled. "What's your name?" he asked. "Hadley," she said after a pause. "Hadley Redding." "Caden Boone." She nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Boone." He smiled faintly. "Just Caden'll do." The day passed slow but steady. He worked on his traps inside, repairing broken springs. She rested, watching snow drift down past the window. Once, she spoke again. "I was a nurse," she said quietly. "At Fort Garland. They said I was helping the wrong people." "The wrong people?" "The Apache prisoners. I gave them water when the others wouldn't. I told the captain it was wrong. He made sure no one believed me after." Caden's jaw tightened again. "That why they branded you?" She nodded, eyes filling. "Said I belonged to the army now. Said no one would ever take me back." For a moment, neither spoke. The fire popped, sending sparks across the hearth. "Seems to me," Caden said softly, "they forgot the part where the Lord owns us first." Hadley blinked at him, surprised by the quiet conviction in his tone. "You believe that?" "I used to," he said, "a long time ago." She studied him, then whispered, "Maybe you still do." That night, while she slept, he opened her small Bible and tried to read. The words were smudged, the pages worn thin. He mouthed each line slow and careful, his voice rough from disuse. "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy." Outside, the wind had died. Inside, something gentler had taken its place. When he looked at her again, her face was peaceful. The lines of fear softened. He thought of how close she'd come to dying in the snow and felt a strange warmth stir in his chest. Something he hadn't known in years. He whispered into the quiet, "You're safe now, Miss Redding. Reckon that's a promise I mean to keep." The lamp burned low. Snow glittered on the sill, and as the mountain slept beneath the pale moon, two lonely souls, one scarred by guilt, the other by cruelty, found themselves bound together by the simplest of miracles: survival. The wind eased by morning, but the cold hung heavy, seeping through every crack in the cabin walls. Caden rose before dawn and stirred the coals in the stove until they flared orange again. He ladled warm broth into a tin cup, then checked on Hadley. Her breath came fast and shallow. Beads of sweat glistened on her brow despite the chill. Fever had her now, and fever was harder to fight than frost. He pressed a damp cloth to her forehead. She stirred, eyes half open, whispering things that made no sense, snatches of prayers, names he didn't know. At one point she cried out, "Captain, no, please don't!" The sound struck him like a lash. He set his jaw and prayed under his breath, the words awkward on his tongue. When the light came through the window, pale and cold as milk, he stepped outside to fetch more snow for water. The world had gone quiet. The storm had buried everything. The wagon he'd found was now only a white mound. He scraped snow into a bucket and looked up toward the ridge. No smoke, no riders. Whoever had left her behind wasn't coming back. Back inside, he found her trying to sit up. Her hands trembled as she gripped the quilt. "You best lie still," he said gently. She blinked at him, dazed. "Where am I?" "My cabin, up the South Ridge." Her gaze darted to the door. "Are they here?" "No one's here but me," Her lips quivered. "You don't understand. They'll come. They always come." Caden crouched beside her. "Ain't nobody coming through that snow? You're safe, ma'am." For a moment she looked at him, searching for truth in his face. Then her body relaxed just enough for him to see how much strength she'd spent staying afraid. He brought her a sip of broth. She drank, eyes fluttering shut. "Thank you. Don't mention it." He sat by the stove, carving a broken snare stick back to shape. The rhythm of the knife steadied his thoughts. He'd helped travelers before, miners, trappers, even a lost preacher once, but never a woman, and never one so hurt. Something about her stirred old instincts, he thought long dead. Protect, provide, keep harm away. By mid-afternoon, her fever climbed again. She tossed under the blanket, face flushed and slick with sweat. Caden wet another cloth and wiped her neck. When he brushed her shoulder, she flinched hard, eyes snapping open. "Please, don't touch me!" He froze. Her fear was sharper now, wild as a trapped doe. "All right," he said softly, backing a step. "Ain't gonna. You're all right." Her chest heaved. After a moment, her eyes focused and the panic ebbed. She whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." He shook his head. "Don't be sorry for not wantin' pain." Silence settled between them. The fire popped. She looked at him as if seeing him properly for the first time. Rough coat, calloused hands, gray in his beard. Not the kind of man she was used to, maybe, but not a danger either. "I don't even know your name," she said faintly. "Caden Boone." "Mr. Boone, you saved me." He gave a small shrug. "Reckon anyone would have done the same." But they both knew that wasn't true. As evening came, he brewed willow bark tea for her fever. She sipped it, grimacing at the taste. "You been alone up here long?" she asked, voice weak but steadying. "7 winters. Had a partner once, but he went east. Guess I liked the quiet." "Quiet can be a heavy thing," she murmured. He gave a short nod. "Sometimes." She studied the fire, her eyes distant. "I used to think quiet meant peace. Now it just sounds like the past breathing down my neck." Caden didn't answer. He understood. When darkness fell, he set another log on the fire and looked toward her pallet. She'd slipped back into uneasy sleep. He noticed her right hand twitching, gripping at air as if clutching something invisible. Curiosity stirred in him again, about who she was before all this, what she'd seen. But he pushed it aside. Some truths had to come in their own time. In the middle of the night, her breathing changed. It became shallow, broken by soft sobs. She was dreaming again. He could make out words between them. The fort, the captain, the whip. Caden sat up, heart pounding. He wanted to wake her, but feared to startle her worse. Finally, he lit the lantern, moved close, and spoke her name softly until her eyes fluttered open. "It's all right," he said. "You were dreaming." Her tears glimmered in the lamplight. "It wasn't a dream." "I know," he said quietly. "Still, it's over now. You're safe here." She turned her face away. "No one's ever safe." He wanted to argue, but the words caught in his throat. He'd lived too long on the edge of things, between snow and hunger, guilt and grace, to claim she was wrong. The days that followed passed in a slow rhythm. Morning meant gathering wood, melting snow, tending her fever. Evening meant soft conversation, and silence broken only by the wind. The fever broke at last on the 4th day. She sat up, pale but clearer-eyed. "You've been watching over me this whole time," she said. "Couldn't do less," he replied. "I owe you my life." He shook his head. "Don't owe me a thing, ma'am." She looked down at her hands, tracing invisible lines on her palms. You don't know what you're saying." "Maybe not," he said, "but I mean it." That afternoon, while she dozed, he mended a hole in the cabin roof. When he climbed down, she was awake again, staring into the fire with a faraway look. "You said your name was Boone," she said. "Were you in the war?" He hesitated. "Scout for the Union. Don't like talking on it much." "Then you know what men can do when they think no one's watching." He set his hammer down and nodded once. "I seen my share." Her voice trembled. "They branded me." "I know," he said softly. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she looked ready to cry again. But he kept his voice gentle, steady as the mountains. "Don't fret. You ain't what they marked you to be." She swallowed hard, then nodded. "You believe that?" "I reckon I do." She took a deep breath, as if something inside her had finally loosened. "Maybe you're the first." Later that night, while the fire burned low, Caden read from her Bible again. His voice was rough but careful, tracing the words slowly. She listened with her eyes closed. "What's it say?" she asked when he paused. He smiled faintly. "Says, 'The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart.' Seems right enough." Hadley's lips curved into the first true smile he'd seen from her. "Then he must be near, because my heart's near worn through." He nodded. "Mine too." Snow drifted against the window, but inside the cabin, warmth grew. A small, steady flame neither of them quite dared to name. That night, she slept without crying out, and for the first time in years, Caden did too. The next morning broke clear and brittle. The mountains gleamed under new snow, each pine draped in white. Smoke curled from Caden's chimney like a thread against the sky. Inside, the cabin smelled of coffee and pine pitch. Hadley sat near the stove, wrapped in a quilt, her skin pale but calm. She watched Caden move about the room, filling a cup from the pot and setting it by her elbow. "Smells strong," she said. He chuckled softly. "It's strong enough to wake the dead. Might even warm the living if you sip slow." She smiled, faint but real. "I'll try." Her voice had grown steadier, but her eyes still carried shadows. She stared into the fire, as though afraid it might show her the past again. Caden noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way she never quite relaxed, even when warmth filled the room. He pulled a chair close, but not too near. "You remember much from that night I found you?" Hadley shook her head. "Only snow, the sound of the wind, and someone yelling my name before everything went black." "Someone with you?" She hesitated. "Soldiers. I was being moved. Then there was shooting. I don't remember after that." Her hands trembled as she lifted the cup. He saw the scars around her wrists now, thin white lines from ropes. She noticed him looking and hid them under the quilt. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you ain't got to hide from me." Her eyes filled. "It's habit now." He let silence rest between them, the kind that gave a person space to breathe. After a time, she said, "You saw the brand?" He nodded once. "I was a nurse," she said, voice small but steady. "Fort Garland, 2 winters back. I tended soldiers and Apache prisoners." Caden didn't speak. He'd been near Garland once. He remembered the rumors, cruelty behind the fort's walls, things the papers didn't print. "One night," she continued, "I caught Captain Hurst striking an Apache boy. He couldn't have been more than 15. I stopped him. I told him I'd report it. He laughed." Her eyes went far away. "When I did report it, they said I was lying, that I'd gone soft, helping the enemy." Caden's jaw tightened. "They branded me a traitor," she whispered. "Said I belonged to the army now. Burned it into me while the chaplain prayed." He closed his eyes for a moment, a muscle working in his cheek. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough. "Ain't no prayer worth that." She turned to him, desperate. "I didn't want to die hating them. But the pain—" She stopped, breathing hard. He reached out, slow, resting his hand on the table near hers but not touching. "You don't need to talk more if it hurts." "I have to," she said. "If I don't, it'll never stop." He nodded. "They were moving me to another fort, somewhere in the mountains. I think they meant to let me die on the road. The storm hit, the wagon tipped, and the soldiers ran. I tried to follow, but the snow was too deep. Then, you found me." Her voice cracked. "I thought you were one of them." "I ain't," he said simply. For a long time, they sat in the glow of the fire. The only sound was the crackle of pine. Finally, she whispered, "I don't understand why you helped me. Most men would have left me to die." Caden looked into the flames. "Maybe I owed somebody. Once did a thing I can't take back. Been trying to live decent ever since. Guess the Lord sent you to make me keep my word." She studied him, tears softening her face. "You think he still hears people like us?" He gave a faint smile. "Reckon he hears the quiet ones best." For the first time, Hadley's shoulders eased. The tension in her face loosened, and she breathed without trembling. The next few days passed easier. Her strength returned slowly. She began helping with chores, washing tin plates, sorting herbs, mending torn shirts. She moved carefully, as if afraid the cabin itself might reject her, but Caden saw her color returning and her voice growing lighter. One afternoon, as sunlight poured through the small window, she asked, "You live up here all alone?" He nodded. "Ain't much choice. Tried town life once, didn't take." "What drove you away?" He hesitated, then said, "Pride. Liquor. Both near killed me." She looked at him quietly, waiting. "There was a man," he said finally. "Talked too much one night in a saloon. Said a thing about a woman I cared for. I drew first." Her eyes flickered. "You killed him." He nodded. "Ain't proud of it. Lost my soul in that moment, I think. Left town, came up here, and never went back." She studied him a moment longer. "Maybe you didn't lose it. Maybe you just set it down for a while." He gave a dry laugh. "Maybe so." Evening fell soft and blue. As the sun sank behind the ridges, Hadley reached for her Bible. She turned its thin pages, reading aloud in a voice that trembled but didn't break. "He healeth the broken in heart, and bindeth up their wounds." Caden listened from his chair. The verse drifted through the cabin like smoke from a sweet fire. "Seems that fits us both," he said. She smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's a start." That night when she slept, Caden stepped outside. The stars were clear as nails hammered into black velvet. He stood beneath them, breathing the cold air, and for the first time in years, he whispered a prayer he didn't quite know how to finish. Inside, Hadley dreamed without fear. The snow outside glittered in the moonlight, unbroken, untouched. By dawn, the bond between them had taken root, a fragile thing, but alive. She no longer flinched when he entered the room. He no longer felt the weight of solitude pressing on his chest. Two wounded spirits, finding something close to peace in each other's company. When she caught him staring at the fire that morning, she said softly, "You look like a man who's seen ghosts." "I have," he said, "but they're quieter now." The snow had settled into a soft crust that cracked under boot steps, and the days began to stretch a little longer. Smoke from the off cabin chimney curled thin and blue against the bright mountain sky. Inside, warmth filled the single room, thick with the smell of pine sap and stew. Caden moved easily through his morning chores, while Hadley sat by the window, mending a tear in one of his shirts. She hummed under her breath, a tune faint and worn by time. Caden stopped, his hands pausing over the stove. "That a hymn?" Hadley looked up. "My mother used to sing it when she worked. Said it kept her heart steady when her hands were tired." He smiled a little. "Reckon that's as good a reason as any." Days slipped by with the slow rhythm of mountain life. The storm was gone, but the drifts outside were still too deep for travel. Caden hunted in short stretches, setting snares and bringing back rabbits or the occasional grouse. He'd find her waiting by the fire when he returned, a pot warming, and her face lifted in quiet welcome. She still jumped when he entered suddenly, but less each day. He made a point to speak before he moved close, to ask before he handed her anything. She seemed to notice his care, and something in her eyes softened because of it. One evening, as dusk bled through the small window, she said, "You could have left me there, you know." He looked up from sharpening his knife. "Wouldn't sit right, leaving someone to die." Her needle paused mid-stitch. "You don't even know me." "Don't need to," he said. "Right's right." Her voice grew quiet. "Not many men live by that anymore." Caden gave a half smile. "Maybe that's why the mountains are so empty." She laughed then, a short, surprised sound that warmed the room. The next morning, she rose early to help with breakfast. When she tried to lift the kettle, her hands shook. Caden took it from her gently, careful not to brush her fingers. "You're still getting your strength back. No shame in rest." She frowned. "I'm tired of resting." He chuckled. "Then you're near healed." Snow melted slow along the roof edges that week. The days grew brighter, though nights stayed cold enough to freeze the creek. In the evenings, they shared quiet talk over supper. She told him about the riverboats near her childhood home, about how she'd dreamed of seeing the world before the war turned it cruel. He listened, head bowed, as though her words were something sacred. Sometimes she'd fall silent mid-story, eyes clouding with pain. He never pressed her. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer made of fear, but of understanding. One afternoon, Caden came back from checking traps with a rabbit slung over his shoulder and snow dusting his beard. She met him at the door, holding out a cup of coffee. "Much obliged," he said, surprised. "You've been feeding me for days," she said. "It's my turn." He took the cup, hand steady and grateful. "Guess I could get used to that." They shared a small smile before she turned back to the fire, cheeks pink from more than the heat. That night, as they sat by the lamplight, Hadley spoke softly. "You remind me of my father." Caden raised a brow. "That good or bad?" She smiled. "Good. He was quiet too, but when he said a thing, you could trust it." He looked down, tracing a crack in the table with his thumb. "Ain't been much of a man worth trustin' in my time." "I think you're wrong," she said. He glanced up, meeting her gaze. The way she said it, calm, certain, made him believe it might be true. As days stretched into another week, her color returned fully. She began walking short distances outside, her breath puffing clouds in the cold air. Caden kept near, but gave her space. Each time she reached the fence line, she'd stop, look back at the mountains, and stand very still. One morning she asked, "Do you ever get lonely up here?" "Sometimes," he admitted, "but the quiet's kinder than most people I've met." She nodded, pulling the shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Still, everyone needs someone to talk to." "Reckon I got you now," he said. She turned to him, startled by the simple honesty in his tone. He meant it without expectation, and that made it safe. When the wind picked up again, They hurried back inside. She moved to stir the pot, and he reached for a ladle at the same moment. Their hands brushed. For a breath, neither moved. Then she drew back, trembling slightly. "Sorry," he murmured. "No," she said quickly. "It's all right. Sometimes I forget how to be touched." He nodded, his voice low. "Take your time. Ain't no rush in healing." She smiled faintly. "You sound like a preacher," he chuckled. "Lord help us both if that's true." Later, when they ate supper by lamplight, she said grace for the first time. Her words were simple. "Thank you for another day we didn't expect to have." He bowed his head, surprised by how much peace those few words brought him. After the meal, he sat near the stove, carving a small wooden cross from a scrap of pine. He wasn't sure why, maybe just something for her to hold on to. When he handed it to her, she stared at it a long moment before whispering, "I thought I'd lost this kind of hope forever." "Guess you found it again," he said. Snow tapped softly at the window, and the fire burned low. In that quiet moment, Caden realized how the cabin had changed. It no longer felt like a place for one man's exile. It felt like home. When he glanced at Hadley, she was smiling faintly at the cross, her hands steady now. "Thank you," she said. He tipped his hat, though he wasn't wearing one. "You're welcome, ma'am." Outside, the wind had turned gentle. Inside, peace settled deep as the snow itself. The morning dawned pale and still, the mountains glazed in ice that shimmered like glass. Caden rose early, tightening his saddle straps while Hadley watched from the doorway. Her breath clouded the air, and her shawl fluttered in the cold. "You sure you ought to ride out?" she asked. "The drifts still look deep." "Town's a 2-day ride if I keep steady," he said. "We're running low on coffee and flour. Need powder and shot, too. You'll be fine here. The storm's done its worst." Hadley's brow furrowed. "I'll be fine," she echoed softly, though her hands clutched the shawl tighter. Caden gave her a reassuring nod. "Keep the fire banked high. Don't open the door for any stranger unless you hear my voice." "I won't," she promised. He rode off through the gray light, snow crunching beneath the horse's hooves. For a long time, Hadley stood there, watching him disappear between the pines. The quiet that followed felt heavier than before. Inside, she tended the fire, cleaned the dishes, and read aloud to herself from the Bible to fill the silence. But when dusk crept in, and the wind began to moan through the cracks again, she found herself whispering prayers she didn't know she still remembered. "Keep him safe out there, Lord. He's the only soul who's been kind to me." Caden rode through 2 hard days. He camped by frozen creeks, wrapped in a thin blanket, dreaming of the woman in his cabin and the warmth of her voice. When he reached the small mining settlement, he traded furs for coffee, flour, salt, and cartridges. The town was half buried in snow, but the saloon stayed busy. Caden stepped inside only to fill his canteen. The chatter died as he crossed the room. Men eyed him, lonely trappers, prospectors, and drifters who didn't like strangers. The barkeep set his drink down. "Been hearing talk," he said. "Army's got riders up in these hills, hunting a woman. Branded nurse, they say. Escaped prisoner. Dangerous, maybe." Caden's jaw stiffened. "What's she supposed to have done?" "Turned on her own kind, so they say. Treachery. Kidnapped by a deserter, name of Boone." Caden froze. The room seemed to go silent except for the hiss of the stove. "You heard right?" the barkeep asked. "Name don't sound familiar," Caden said evenly. He tossed a coin onto the counter and walked out before the man could answer. Outside, his breath came sharp. "They think I took her. They'll come looking." He loaded the supplies fast, swung into the saddle, and pushed hard for home. The journey back felt longer. Each sound in the forest set his nerves on edge. When the cabin finally came into view under the afternoon sun, relief loosened his chest. Smoke curled steady from the chimney. She'd kept the fire going, just like he asked. Hadley was by the stove when he entered, her hair loose around her shoulders, the warmth of the flames painting her face gold. She smiled faintly. "You made it back." "Snow near swallowed me," he said, shaking it from his coat. "But I've got everything we need." She helped him unpack, humming softly, as she stacked the new tins on the shelf. He watched her move, struck again by how much life had returned to her. When they sat to supper, he couldn't keep it in any longer. "I need to tell you something." Her hand paused on the tin plate. "What is it?" He met her gaze. "There's talk in town. Soldiers are saying a branded nurse escaped. They think a man named Boone took her. Said he's a deserter." The blood drained from her face. "They're coming?" "Could be. Maybe not right away, but word travels." She looked down, fingers twisting in her lap. "Then you're in danger because of me." He shook his head. "Ain't your fault. The ones hunting you got their own sins to cover." Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't understand. That Captain Hurst, he'll never stop. He'll kill you if he finds you with me." "Let him try," Caden said quietly. "Ain't the first devil I've faced." She turned toward the fire, her voice barely a whisper. "You should let me go." "Not a chance." Her breath caught. "You could be hanged." "Maybe. But I'd rather hang for protecting the innocent than live easy while they suffer." The words hung between them, heavy as the mountain air. After a long silence, she whispered, "Why would you do that for me?" He looked at her steadily. "Because you deserve more than what they gave you. And maybe I'm tired of running from my own ghosts." That night neither of them slept much. Outside, the wind moaned through the eaves. Inside, she sat by the hearth, her face caught between light and shadow, while he checked his rifle and stared into the fire. By dawn, the decision was made without words. He packed what they could carry: dried meat, flour, and her Bible. "Where will we go?" she asked quietly. "South Pass," he said. "There's an old mission down there, half empty. We'll lie low till spring." She nodded. Her eyes brimmed, but her voice was steady. "I trust you." Caden stopped what he was doing. Those 3 words hit him harder than any bullet. He tipped his hat slightly, voice rough. "I'll get you through this, Hadley. I swear it." They rode out just as the sun touched the ridge. Snow sparkled under the hooves of Caden's horse. Behind them, the little cabin stood quiet, smoke trailing into the cold blue sky. Neither looked back. The world ahead was wide and waiting, and full of danger. As they vanished into the pines, a crow lifted from a nearby branch, black wings slicing the air. In the valley below, far to the east, an army patrol moved along the trail, their leader carrying a folded paper with 2 names on it: Hadley Redding, Caden Boone. The trail south wound through a valley where the snow lay deep and unbroken. The morning sun glared off white slopes, blinding and sharp. Caden rode first, leaning forward in the saddle, his rifle strapped across his back, and his eyes sweeping the tree line. Hadley rode, behind him on the same horse, her hands clutching the worn saddle horn, her breath coming out in small clouds. They had left before dawn. By now the world had grown quiet except for the steady rhythm of hooves and the distant call of a raven. The cold bit through gloves and wool. Every few miles, Caden stopped to rest the horse and check for tracks. So far, there were none. "You holding up all right?" he asked over his shoulder. Hadley nodded, though her face was pale. "I'll manage. I've been through worse." He looked back at her, studying the tight line of her jaw. "I believe you." Hours passed. They climbed higher into the mountains where the wind whipped down from the peaks like knives. Caden guided the horse through narrow switchbacks, always watching for fresh prints or smoke. The army might have slower mounts, but they had more men. He knew that if pursuit came, it would come hard. When the sun began to dip behind the ridges, he led them off the main trail toward a cluster of pines and a half-frozen creek. "We'll camp here," he said. Hadley slid down stiffly, gripping the saddle for balance. Her legs trembled from the ride. Caden reached a hand to steady her, but stopped himself halfway. She steadied on her own and gave a small nod. "Thank you." He built a fire, small and smokeless, and set a pot of coffee over the flames. She sat wrapped in his extra coat, watching sparks rise into the blue dusk. The mountains towered above them, silent and still. For a while, neither spoke. Then Hadley said softly, "I used to think the world ended past the fort walls. Out here, it feels like it might begin again." Caden poked at the fire. "Ain't nothing out here but what you make of it." "Then maybe that's enough." He looked up, meeting her eyes in the flicker of firelight. "Maybe it is." Later, as the fire burned low, she asked, "Why did you really come to these mountains?" Caden hesitated. "Guess I was running from myself." "What did you do?" He took a slow breath. "Once drew a gun on a man I shouldn't have. Thought it'd fix something inside me. It didn't, only broke more." She listened without judgment, her voice gentle. "We all break things when we hurt." "Yours wasn't your fault," he said quietly. "Maybe not," she whispered, "but it still lives in me." The fire crackled. Caden reached for a stick and drew shapes in the snow, lines that meant nothing, only motion to fill the silence. "I used to pray every night," she said after a while. "Stopped after the fort. Couldn't believe God would listen after what they did." He stared into the fire. "I stopped praying a long time before that. Maybe he just got tired of waiting on me." Hadley looked up. "Or maybe he waited until we both had something worth praying for." Her words caught him off guard. He looked at her and saw that she meant it, her face calm, eyes reflecting the firelight. He nodded slowly. "Could be." They settled for the night, huddled near the small fire for warmth but with space between them. The cold seeped through their coats, yet both felt something new, a strange, quiet comfort in knowing they were not alone. By dawn, the world lay silver and still. They broke camp early, moving south again. The snow had crusted overnight, making travel easier. As they climbed, Hadley spoke more freely, telling him stories of her mother's garden, of reading by candlelight, of how she once dreamed of being a doctor before war turned her into a nurse. "You'd have made a fine one," he said. She smiled faintly. "I don't know. I was always better at healing hearts than bones." "Maybe that's harder work," he said. Her eyes softened. "And you, Caden Boone, what did you want before all this?" He thought for a long moment before answering. "Peace. Have you found it?" He glanced at her, his breath fogging the air. "Not yet. But I think I'm getting close." They rode on through the narrow pass, the sound of hooves muffled by snow. Late in the afternoon, they came upon a frozen stream cutting through a canyon. The trail curved down to a small meadow where an old mission bell tower rose in the distance, its roof half collapsed, its cross leaning toward the west. Caden reined in the horse. "There it is, the old mission." Hadley gazed at it in wonder. "It's beautiful, even broken." He nodded. "Good place to rest a while." Might be no one's used it in years." As they approached, ravens lifted from the bell tower, their wings black against the pale sky. Caden pushed open the heavy door, its hinges creaking. Inside, dust lay thick, and sunlight slanted through cracked windows. A wooden altar stood at the far end, draped with cobwebs. He helped Hadley dismount. "We'll make it livable." Within the hour, he'd cleared space, stacked firewood, and set a small fire in the stone hearth. Hadley brushed dust from the altar and placed her Bible upon it, open to a random page. Caden watched her quietly. "You think he still listens in places like this?" She smiled faintly. "I think he never left." That night they ate simple stew, sitting across from each other in the flickering light. The fire warmed the mission's old stones, and the wind outside carried the faint toll of the bell above. "Feels like the world forgot this place," Hadley said. "Maybe that's why it's worth remembering," Caden answered. The quiet between them was different now, gentler, almost sacred. For the first time since the storm, Hadley fell asleep without trembling, her hand resting near the small pine cross he had carved for her. Caden sat a long while by the dying fire, listening to the wind move through the bell tower. He thought of the life he'd lived, of blood, regret, and years of silence, and wondered if redemption might really be found in a forgotten place, like this. When he finally lay down near the door, he whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for the company." Outside, the wind carried his words into the cold, and the mountains held them like a prayer. Morning light filtered through the cracked windows of the old mission, painting stripes of gold across the dusty stone floor. The air inside smelled faintly of smoke and age. Outside, the forest stretched in all directions, tall pines creaking in the wind, their boughs heavy with snow. Caden stirred the fire back to life, his breath misting in the cold air. Hadley still slept on a cot near the hearth, wrapped in a quilt that looked almost too big for her small frame. The rise and fall of her breathing steadied him more than any prayer. When she woke, she smiled faintly. "You were up before the sun again." "Old habit," he said, pouring her a cup of coffee. "You sleep well?" "Well enough," she said. "It's quiet here, almost too quiet." He nodded. Quiet can feel strange after too much noise. They spent the day setting the place to rights. Caden patched a hole in the roof with bark and canvas from his saddle roll. Hadley swept the dust from the floor, humming softly as she worked. She found a few broken pews, still sturdy enough to serve as benches, and dragged them closer to the fire. By midday, the mission began to feel less like a ruin and more like a home. "I used to work in places like this," Hadley said, brushing dirt from her skirt. "Hospices, field tents, places where men died too fast for comfort." Caden paused in his work, hammer in hand. "This one feels different, I reckon." She nodded. "Here, it feels like no one's dying anymore." He smiled quietly. "Not today, at least." They shared a meal of rabbit stew and cornbread that night, sitting across from each other at a makeshift table. The flames threw soft light over the cracked altar where her Bible lay open. When the meal was done, Hadley spoke in a low voice. "You ever wonder if the Lord puts us in places like this to make us remember what we've forgotten?" Caden leaned back, thoughtful. "I used to think he'd forgotten me altogether." "And now?" she asked. He looked towards the fire. "Now I ain't so sure." For the first time, she reached out, not to touch him, but to rest her hand on the edge of the table between them. "Maybe he sent you for me, and me for you." The words hung in the warm air like smoke. Caden swallowed hard, unsure what to say. He wasn't used to talk of grace, not directed at him. Later that night, while Hadley slept, Caden walked outside. The moon shone bright through the pine branches, lighting the clearing around the mission. The stillness was deep enough to make his heartbeat sound loud in his chest. He knelt beside the stone steps, brushing away snow. Beneath the frost, he found an old carving, a cross, hand-cut and worn smooth by years of wind. He traced it with a calloused thumb and whispered, "Reckon you ain't done with us yet." The next morning brought thin sunlight and the scent of pine smoke. Hadley stood by the window, watching a hawk circle above the trees. "Looks free," she said softly. Caden followed her gaze. "Ain't all freedom's easy." She turned to him. "You speak from knowing." He gave a slow nod. "Freedom costs, same as peace." She smiled faintly. "Still worth the price, I think." They spent the following days mending what they could. Caden built a rough door latch from iron nails. Hadley cleaned the cracked altar, arranging smooth river stones along its edge. Each evening they shared stories by firelight, hers of childhood rivers and her mother's laughter, his of mountain storms and quiet summers when the world seemed gentler. One evening, while the snow fell in soft sheets outside, she sang again. The same hymn as before, though now her voice was stronger. The sound filled the mission, rising to the rafters and fading softly into the night. Caden sat with his hands clasped, eyes closed, listening. He felt something break loose inside him. Not pain this time, but a strange, tender ache. When the song ended, she looked at him shyly. "I'm sorry. I haven't sung in years." "Don't apologize," he said. "Sounded like a prayer to me." She smiled. Maybe it was. That night they slept easier than they had in months. The wind sighed through the trees, and the fire glowed steady until dawn. By morning, Caden knew the mountains had changed him. The loneliness that had once felt like armor now felt like something he no longer needed. Hadley's laughter, the warmth in her eyes, the way she said his name, it had all begun to chip away at the stone around his heart. He didn't say any of that out loud. Instead, he cooked breakfast and poured her coffee like it was the most ordinary morning in the world. And for the first time, it truly was. The sun broke through the trees, spilling light across the mission floor. It caught the dust motes drifting in the air, turning them to gold. Hadley stood by the window, her hair loose, her hands folded around a tin cup of coffee. She had grown stronger, her cheeks pink with warmth, her posture less guarded. Caden watched her quietly from the table, amazed by the change. She noticed his gaze and smiled. "You're staring, Mr. Boone," he chuckled, setting down his cup. "Just making sure the fever didn't take you back in the night." "It didn't," she said, her eyes soft. "I think I'm finally well." "Well enough to learn a little readin'?" he teased gently. Her brows lifted. "You can't read?" "Some," he admitted. "Enough to know my name on a bill of sale, not enough to read your good book proper." Hadley smiled, her expression turning tender. "Then we'll fix that." She brought her Bible to the table and opened it to the book of Psalms. The pages were thin as moth wings. She pointed to a verse and began to teach him the letters. He stumbled over the words, his rough voice low but patient. "The Lord is my shepherd," he sounded out, slow and careful. Her eyes glistened. "That's very good, Caden." He gave a shy grin. "Don't reckon anyone said that to me in 20 years. As days passed, their lessons became part of the rhythm of life. Mornings were for work, mending, chopping wood, and hunting. Evenings were for reading by firelight. Hadley's voice was calm and sure, and his patience surprised even himself. When he misread a word, she laughed softly, her laughter brightening the room like sunlight on the floorboards. You learn quick, she said one night. Got a good teacher, he answered. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat the air felt still. Too still. She looked away first, pretending to study the page. Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing the forest in silence. One evening, while Caden whittled by the hearth, Hadley sang quietly. Her voice was stronger now, full of the kind of grace that comes from surviving pain. Caden set down his knife, listening. The song was one of hope and endurance, and he could hear her heart in every note. When she finished, he said softly, "You sound like light breaking through a storm." Her cheeks flushed. "I don't remember the last time anyone listened." "Then they've been missing something worth hearing." For a moment, neither spoke. The fire popped. He looked down at his hands, calloused and scarred. "I ain't much for speaking pretty, Hadley, but this place—" He gestured toward the cabin. "Don't feel empty no more." She reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of his. "Then maybe we've both found what we lost." He nodded slowly. "Maybe so." Over the next week, spring began to whisper at the edges of the mountains. The snow softened, dripping from the eaves in slow rivulets. Birds returned to the trees, their songs faint but real. Hadley began walking farther each day, gathering pine cones and clearing paths. She hummed as she worked, sometimes stopping to watch Caden chop wood or patch the corral fence. One afternoon, while she cleaned the small altar, she spoke suddenly. "Do you ever think of leaving this place when it warms?" Caden leaned on his axe handle. "Don't reckon I've thought that far." "Maybe you should," she said, turning to him. "You deserve to live, not just survive." He smiled, weary and gentle. "Ain't sure I'd know the difference anymore." "Then I'll show you," she said softly. That night, as the fire burned low, Hadley read aloud again. Her voice wove through the quiet like the sound of water over stone. Caden listened with eyes half closed, the words sinking deep. When she finished, she looked up. "You still think he forgot you?" Caden opened his eyes and met her gaze. "No, I think he was just waiting till I shut up long enough to listen." Hadley smiled through tears she didn't try to hide. "You're listening now." He nodded. "Every word." The warmth between them grew that night. Not rushed, not spoken, just known. As dawn broke the next morning, a bell tolled faintly from the tower above, stirred by the wind. Hadley looked up, startled. "I thought it was broken," she whispered. Caden smiled faintly. Maybe it just needed a reason to ring again. She looked toward him, the rising sun touching her face. "Then maybe we both did." Snow melted into streams that whispered down the slopes, filling the air with the smell of damp pine and new earth. The forest around the mission began to stir with life again. Birds calling, squirrels darting through branches, the sound of thawing ice dripping from the roof. Caden stood outside one morning, breathing it in. For the first time in years, he felt the world wasn't trying to push him away. Inside, Hadley swept the floor, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, a small smile playing on her lips. "Smells like the world's waking up," she said. Caden nodded, leaning his rifle against the doorframe. "Reckon it's about time?" They shared a breakfast of cornbread and honey she'd saved from her nurse's satchel. He noticed the way she hummed without thinking, her spirit lighter than it had ever been. The days had become a soft rhythm of work, reading, prayer, and quiet laughter. Then, one afternoon, Caden heard the crunch of footsteps in the snow outside. He froze, listening. The sound wasn't the shuffle of animals. It was measured, human. "Stay inside," he said, his tone low. Hadley's face paled, but she nodded. Caden stepped into the clearing, rifle held steady but lowered. Two figures emerged from the trees, a bearded man in a wool coat and a woman beside him, dark-haired, wrapped in a blanket of woven colors. They carried no weapons in sight, only a pack mule and a Bible strapped to the saddle. "Peace to you," the man called, raising a hand. "We mean no harm." Caden didn't relax. "Travelers?" "Preacher," the man said with a tired smile. "Name's Cole. This is my wife, Mariah. We've been on the road since Taos." Mariah nodded in greeting. Her voice was soft but firm. "We saw your smoke. We thought someone might need help or company." Caden hesitated, then motioned toward the door. "Got both in short supply. You're welcome to a warm fire." Inside, Hadley stood near the hearth, eyes wary. When Cole entered, his gaze fell on her, then froze. "Miss Redding?" he said quietly. Her eyes widened. "Reverend Cole?" He removed his hat slowly, shame flickering across his face. "I remember you. Fort Garland." Caden tensed. "You knew her?" Cole nodded. "I was the chaplain there once. Before—" His voice faltered. "Before the branding." Hadley's hand trembled against the chair. "You prayed over me," she whispered. "I did," he said hoarsely, "and I've regretted it every day since." Silence fell heavy as stone. The only sound was the crackling of the fire. Mariah stepped forward gently, her eyes kind. "My husband carries that guilt like a stone in his chest. He's been seeking a way to make it right." Cole nodded, voice breaking. "If I'd spoken the truth then, you wouldn't have suffered. I was a coward, Miss Redding. Forgive me." Hadley stared at him for a long moment. The past rose before her like a ghost. The cold cell, the heat of the iron, his voice praying while she screamed. Then, slowly, she said, "I already did." Tears glistened in Cole's eyes. "Then God's kinder than I deserve." Caden lowered his rifle completely and offered the preacher a seat. "Reckon the Lord sent you here for a reason." They shared supper that evening, the four of them gathered around the fire. Mariah spoke of her people's valley to the west, how the soldiers had taken their water, how she'd married Cole after the war to help him understand both sides. Her voice was calm, woven with strength. Caden listened with quiet respect. He noticed how Hadley's eyes softened as Mariah spoke, finding comfort in her presence. When the meal was done, Cole reached into his pack and drew out a worn notebook. "I can clear your name," he said. "I know what Captain Hurst did. I saw it all, and I'll swear to it in Denver. The court will listen to a reverend, even a guilty one." Hadley stared at the notebook as though it might vanish. "You'd do that for me?" He nodded. "I'd do it for truth." For the first time since the fort, Hadley allowed herself to imagine a life beyond running, a name free of shame, a future she could choose. Caden's chest tightened. He wanted that for her more than anything, even if it meant losing her. Later that night, as the preacher and his wife slept near the hearth, Hadley whispered, "Do you think it's possible? That they'll believe him?" Caden stared into the dying fire. "If there's justice left in this world, they will." "And if there's not?" she asked softly. He looked at her, his eyes steady. "Then I'll believe enough for both of us." The firelight flickered across their faces, gold and warm, as the mountains outside fell silent under the coming dark. For the first time in a long while, hope felt real. The days that followed brought a peace the mission hadn't known in years. Sunlight poured through the windows each morning, spilling across the stone floor, warming even the coldest corners. Reverend Cole spent long hours writing at the table, his hand shaking slightly as he filled page after page with the truth. Names, dates, testimonies, all of it meant to clear Hadley's name. Mariah tended a small fire and brewed pine needle tea, humming a Ute song that blended with the rustle of wind outside. Hadley moved quietly between them, carrying wood, washing tin cups, or simply standing at the door to feel the sunlight on her face. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to dream of Denver. Not the city of soldiers and trials, but a place where she could work again, heal again, live again. Caden watched her as she stood at the doorway, her hair stirring in the mountain wind, and felt a strange mixture of pride and ache. "You'll be free soon," he said one afternoon as she set a pot of stew on the fire. She looked up at him. "I don't even know what that means anymore." "It means no one owns your story but you." Her eyes glistened. "And what about you, Caden Boone? What will you do when I'm gone?" He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Probably get lost without someone to remind me how many letters are in Shepherd." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're a good man, Caden." "Never was before," he said quietly. "Guess I'm learning late." That evening, the four of them gathered for supper. Cole's cough had worsened, but his eyes were bright. He read aloud from what he'd written, his voice breaking now and again. "This will reach the court by spring," he said. "It will bear my signature and my seal. The truth will speak." Hadley's hands trembled as she folded the pages, pressing them to her heart. "You're giving me my life back." "No," Cole said, smiling faintly. "God's giving it. I'm just the messenger." After supper, Mariah stepped outside with Hadley to fetch water from the stream. The air was crisp and clear, filled with the scent of thawing pine. "My husband speaks of justice," Mariah said softly, her dark eyes watching the stars. "But justice without mercy is a hard road. You carry both now. Use them well." Hadley nodded slowly. "I will." Mariah smiled. "And do not fear touch forever. Some hands wound, but others heal." When they returned, the men were sitting by the fire. Caden had his Bible open, stumbling over a verse while Cole helped him sound out the words. The sight made Hadley smile, a trapper and a preacher, sharing scripture like old friends. Later, after Mariah and Cole had gone to sleep, Caden and Hadley stepped outside. The night was still and starlit, the valley spread out below like silver glass. "Hard to believe this world can be cruel," Hadley said quietly. Caden looked out across the land. "Cruelty's loud, kindness is quieter, but it lasts longer." She turned toward him. "You really believe that?" He nodded. "I do now." For a moment, she stood close enough that he could feel her warmth through the cool air. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up on me." "Never could," he said simply. A silence fell between them. Not empty this time, but full of something new. The kind of silence that held 1,000 words neither dared to say. When they returned inside, Hadley paused by the altar. She opened her Bible and placed the preacher's pages inside, pressing them flat. "There," she said softly. "Safe until we reach Denver." Cole coughed in his sleep. Mariah rose to comfort him, whispering in Ute until the fit passed. Caden tended the fire, his face solemn. He knew the old preacher's health was failing fast. Before dawn, Hadley woke to the sound of rain pattering softly on the roof. She turned toward the door and saw Caden standing in the gray light, staring out at the valley. "Can't sleep?" she asked gently. "Too much thinking." "About what?" He smiled without turning. "About what happens when good people finally get what they deserve." Hadley joined him at the doorway, wrapping the quilt tighter around her shoulders. "And what's that?" He looked down at her, his eyes warm and steady. A chance to start over. Rain slid down the eaves, and somewhere in the distance, Thunder rolled like a slow drumbeat. The world was changing, washing clean. For the first time since she'd fled the fort, Hadley let herself imagine a future where her name wasn't whispered with shame, but with respect, maybe even love. The rain cleared by morning, leaving the mountains sharp and clean under the sun. Steam rose from the ground, and the scent of wet pine drifted through the air. It felt like a new beginning. Inside the mission, Reverend Cole sealed the last of his letters, pressing a wax stamp into the red pool and whispering a short prayer over it. "There," he said, smiling weakly. "It's done. Truth travels slow, but it still travels." Hadley smiled, though worry tugged at her. "You should rest, Reverend. Your cough sounds worse." Cole waved her concern away. "Not until these pages reach Denver." He looked at Caden. "You've got a steady horse and a good head. You'll take them, won't you?" Caden opened his mouth to answer, but the sound of hooves outside cut through his words. Heavy. Too many. His eyes shot to the door. "Someone's coming." He moved fast, grabbing his rifle from the wall. Mariah ran to the window and peered out. Her voice came low, sharp. "Riders, 4 of them, armed." Hadley's blood turned cold. "Hurst's men?" Caden nodded grimly. "Has to be." Cole pushed himself up, coughing hard. "Then we'll stand for what's right." The first shot cracked through the morning like thunder. The window beside Mariah shattered, and she pulled back with a cry. Caden slammed the door shut, bolting it with a beam of wood. "Hadley, get down!" he shouted, dragging her behind the altar. Gunfire rattled against the walls, sending splinters flying. The old mission bell began to ring from the vibrations, tolling wildly above them. Cole clutched his chest, gasping. "My pistol!" Caden tossed him the weapon and fired through the doorway gap, dropping one rider from his horse. The others pulled back behind the trees, shouting orders. "They'll circle around," Caden muttered. "Try to smoke us out." Hadley's heart hammered in her chest. She crawled toward Mariah, who was clutching her arm, blood seeping through the sleeve. "You're hurt," Mariah's jaw clenched. "It's nothing." Another bullet tore through the wall, striking the altar. The Bible fell open on the floor, pages fluttering. Hadley reached for it instinctively, pressing it to her chest. "Caden," she cried, "we can't fight them all." He glanced at her, eyes fierce but calm. "We ain't gotta win. Just gotta hold long enough for them to give up." But he knew better. These weren't men sent to bring justice. They were sent to silence witnesses. Outside, a deep voice called out, echoing through the clearing. "Boone, hand over the girl and we'll let you live." Hadley froze. That voice, sharp, arrogant, cruel. "Captain Hurst," Caden's grip tightened on his rifle. "Figured as much." Hurst laughed. "You can't hide her forever, Boone. She belongs to the army, and to me." Rage flashed through Caden's chest. "She don't belong to anyone," he shouted back. The answer came in gunfire. Wood splintered, the air filled with smoke. Cole rose from his knees, coughing blood, and fired blindly through the broken window. His bullet struck true. Another man fell. Then came the return shot. It hit the preacher square in the chest. "Samuel!" Mariah screamed, rushing to him. Caden fired back until the rifle clicked empty. He crawled to Cole's side. The old preacher's lips moved faintly, blood staining his collar. "Finish it," Cole whispered. "Denver." "The truth." Hadley pressed his hand between hers, tears streaking her face. "Don't talk, please." Cole looked at her, his eyes fading but peaceful. "You forgive more than most can? That's how I know. God lives in you still." Then his breath left him. Mariah wept softly over his body, her voice low in her own language, a song of parting. Outside, silence fell for a moment. The riders were reloading, regrouping. Caden turned to Hadley, his face hard as stone. "They'll burn us out next. You gotta ride." "I won't leave you." "You have to. Take his papers, take the truth." She shook her head fiercely. "I'm not running again." He gripped her shoulders. "This ain't running, it's surviving. You get to Denver, you make his death mean something." Her eyes met his, full of tears and fire. "And you?" "I'll draw them off." Before she could protest again, a flaming torch crashed through the broken window. The curtains caught, smoke filling the room. Caden shoved her toward the side door. "Go." Hadley snatched the preacher's Bible and the letters. Mariah pressed a hand to her heart, whispering a blessing in Ute. Caden burst through the front door, firing as he went. The riders shouted, surprised. 2 bullets tore into the dirt near his boots, but his return fire struck one, man in the shoulder. The others wheeled their horses to chase him. Behind them, Hadley mounted the preacher's mule, clutching the Bible tight. She looked back once. The mission wreathed in smoke, flames licking the roof, Mariah cradling her husband's body. Then she kicked the mule into motion, tears streaming down her face as the gunfire echoed behind her. Through the trees, she heard Caden's voice, shouting defiance. Then the sound was lost in the roar of the burning roof. The trail ahead was narrow, slick with mud and ash. Hadley's hands shook as she urged the animal onward. Her heart pounded, her breath coming in sobs. When she reached the ridge, she looked back once more. The mission was just a smear of smoke against the bright sky. She whispered, "Lord, please, don't let him die." The wind carried her words away. Hadley rode hard through the forest, the mule's hooves slapping against half-frozen ground. Smoke from the burning mission trailed behind her like a black scar in the sky. Her heart thundered. She could still hear the echo of gunfire, Caden's rifle cracking again and again, then silence. "Please, God," she whispered, voice raw. "Don't let him be gone." She clutched the Bible and letters close to her chest, the reins slick with rain and sweat. Branches tore at her sleeves. She didn't stop until the sound of pursuit faded behind her, leaving only the hush of wind through pines. By dusk, her strength gave out. The mule stumbled to a halt near a frozen creek, and Hadley slid to the ground. Her knees buckled. She fell against a tree, trembling. The air was sharp with cold and the smell of pine smoke from distant fire. When she tried to move, pain flared in her side. She looked down. Her dress was dark with blood. Somewhere in the chaos, a bullet or splinter had found her. She pressed a hand to the wound, biting back a cry. "Not now," she gasped. "Not yet." The forest began to spin. Through a haze of pain, she thought she heard footsteps crunching through the snow. She tried to lift the pistol Caden had given her, but her hands shook too badly. Then she saw him. Caden stumbled into the clearing, face smeared with soot, coat torn, eyes wide with fear and relief. "Hadley." His voice broke on her name. She let out a sob of disbelief. "You're alive." "Barely," he said, falling to his knees beside her. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," she whispered, though her lips had gone pale. "The letters, they're safe." He tore a strip from his coat and pressed it to her side. "Don't talk, just breathe." She caught his wrist weakly. "You shouldn't have come back." "I told you once, I don't run from folks I care about." Her eyes filled. "They'll follow us." "They won't. Hurst's down. Got him before I came after you." She blinked, stunned. "He's gone?" Caden nodded, his jaw tight. "He won't hurt nobody again." Tears spilled over her cheeks. "Then it's finished." He shook his head. "Not yet. You need a doctor. We're still a day's ride from the telegraph station." She tried to smile. "You always did pick long roads." He gathered her gently into his arms, careful not to touch the wound. "You rest now. I'll get us there." "Please, don't touch me," she whispered weakly, a reflex born of pain and memory. He froze, eyes full of sorrow. "All right, but I ain't letting you go neither." He lifted her carefully, wrapping her in the blanket from the saddle, cradling her as though she were made of glass. Her head fell against his shoulder, her breath shallow. All night he walked. Through wind and sleet, through silence and darkness, he carried her. The forest closed around them, moonlight glinting off wet branches. He whispered to her to stay awake, told her stories about rivers and summer rains, about the sound of church bells he hadn't heard in years. Near dawn, he stumbled into a clearing with a collapsed telegraph shed, half standing but dry. He laid her down gently inside, his hands trembling. She blinked up at him, her face pale but calm. "You came back for me." He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Didn't know how not to." She smiled faintly. "You always keep your promises." He swallowed hard. "Try to." Her hand reached for his. "Caden, don't talk," he said softly. "Save your strength." But she didn't stop. "All this time I thought the Lord turned his face from me, but he sent you." He bowed his head, tears stinging his eyes. "No, Hadley, he sent you to me." For a long moment, there was only the sound of wind outside, gentle and steady. Then she whispered, "If I don't wake..." "Don't you say that." She smiled weakly. "Promise me you'll live. Not just survive. Live." He gripped her hand. "You'll see to that yourself. You're gonna make it." She closed her eyes, her breathing faint but even. Caden worked through the morning, building a fire and cleaning her wound with melted snow and the last of his whiskey. He whispered prayers between curses, the kind a man says when he doesn't know if anyone's listening. When she stirred hours later, her fever had broken. He exhaled shakily, exhaustion washing over him. She opened her eyes, confused. "You stayed." "Didn't have anywhere else worth being," he said quietly. Outside, the forest was silent but not dead, crows calling faintly in the distance, the trickle of thawing ice. Caden fed the fire and watched the color return slowly to her cheeks. As night fell again, she reached for his hand, this time without fear. "You can touch me now," she whispered. He clasped her fingers gently, reverently, as if holding a prayer made flesh. In that moment, Caden Boone, who had once believed himself beyond saving, knew he had been forgiven. By her, and maybe by God. Dawn broke cold and clean over the Fuort mountains. The forest lay hushed under a faint layer of mist, and the creek near the telegraph post ran clear with melting snow. Caden stirred the coals, coaxing the small fire back to life. His coat was soaked through, his hands raw from cold, but Hadley was alive, and that was all that mattered. She stirred on the blanket near the fire, eyes fluttering open. "Caden? I'm here," he said gently. "You slept near half a day." Her lips curved faintly. "You look worse than I feel." He grinned. Probably true. When she tried to sit up, he steadied her without hesitation. She didn't flinch this time. Instead, she met his gaze with quiet trust. "Where are we?" "Old telegraph stop. Abandoned a while back. We're maybe a day's ride from Denver if the weather holds." "Then we'll make it," she whispered. He hesitated. "You sure you're strong enough?" "I've been fighting to live since the day they branded me," she said softly. "I'm not stopping now." He helped her into the saddle, then mounted behind her, careful of her side. As the mule started forward, the mountains fell away behind them. The road wound down through open country where spring grass was beginning to show beneath the snow. By midday, the sun broke through the clouds. They stopped near a bend in the trail to rest. Hadley leaned against his shoulder, pale but smiling. "I used to think I'd never see spring again," she said. "You're seeing it now," he said quietly. She looked out across the valley, her voice barely above a whisper. "Feels like the world forgave me." "Maybe it did," he said. "Or maybe you forgave it first." They rode on. The path followed a frozen river for miles, the water cracking under the sun. Hawks circled high overhead, and once they passed a wagon heading east, 2 settlers with a child bundled between them. Hadley waved, and the child waved back. "Seems folks still find reasons to hope," she said. Caden nodded. "Always do, else the world would have quit turnin' long ago." By late afternoon, the mule began to limp, favoring its front leg. Caden dismounted and led the way on foot. The road dipped into a hollow where a weathered telegraph pole leaned crooked beside a small shack. Smoke curled faintly from its chimney. A woman stepped out, her hair streaked with gray, spectacles perched on her nose. She carried a rifle easily, but without threat. "Travelers?" she called. "Just passing through," Caden said. "Name's Boone. She's hurt some. Needs shelter and maybe word sent to Denver." The woman's eyes softened when she saw Hadley slumped in the saddle. "Come on in then. I'm Ruth Lang, telegraph clerk out here, though not many wires still hum this far west." Inside, the small post smelled of kerosene and paper. Telegraph equipment lined the wall, keys and wires humming faintly with static. Mrs. Lang spread blankets near the stove and helped Caden lower Hadley down. "She's fevered," Ruth murmured, touching her forehead. "You've come a long way." "Too long," Caden said quietly. "We lost good folks on the way." Ruth's eyes met his, steady, kind, full of understanding that didn't need words. "I'll heat water and send your message." As she worked the telegraph key, the rhythmic clicks filled the cabin. "What's the message?" Caden hesitated. "To the territorial court in Denver. Tell him a Reverend Samuel Cole's testimony's on its way. Name's Hadley Redding. Tell him she's innocent." Ruth nodded and began tapping the message with sure hands. By nightfall, Hadley had fallen asleep beside the fire. Her fever had returned, though not as bad as before. Caden sat beside her, holding her hand gently between his rough palms. Mrs. Lang brewed coffee and sat down across from him. "You care for her deep," she said softly. "She saved me," he murmured, "even when she didn't know it." Ruth nodded. "Then don't stop saving each other." She looked toward Hadley. "Touch her like a prayer, not a claim. That kind of touch heals more than a doctor can." Caden swallowed hard. "I'll remember that." Through the long hours of the night, he stayed awake, feeding the fire and whispering words of comfort. He told her stories of the mountains, of hawks nesting in the cliffs, of trout in the streams they'd cross when summer came. By dawn, the fever broke again. Her eyes fluttered open, finding his. "You stayed," she whispered. "Always," he said. Outside, the first light touched the plains, turning frost to silver. Ruth Lang came in with coffee, smiling. "Got a telegraph back. They received your message. Said to bring her in soon as she's able." Hadley smiled weakly. "Then it's nearly over." Caden brushed her hair from her forehead. "Almost, darlin'. Almost." They rested one more night at the post before setting out again. When they left, Ruth stood in the doorway, watching them ride toward the horizon. "Godspeed, both of you," she called. The mule's hooves thudded steady against the thawing ground. Behind them, the telegraph wire sang faintly in the morning wind, clicking out its steady song of connection, of news, of mercy still traveling down a fragile line. Caden looked at Hadley, her face turned toward the sun, and thought that for once the world didn't look so lonely. The plains rolled out before them like an ocean of gold, unbroken except for the far blue line of mountains behind. Spring had come early to the territory. The sun shone bright over puddles left by melting snow, and every breath of wind smelled faintly of new grass and earth. Caden rode with Hadley in the saddle before him, the mule's pace slow but steady. She was wrapped in his coat, her hair loose under the brim of his hat, her eyes open and watchful again. The color had come back to her cheeks, and when she smiled, he could almost forget the months of blood and cold that lay behind them. Denver rose on the horizon by noon of the third day, a scattering of rooftops at first, then smokestacks, and finally the sound of hammers and wagon wheels. The town was waking from winter too, restless and growing. Men shouted orders at teams of horses. A church bell rang over the rattle of iron wheels on stone. To Hadley, the noise was both frightening and marvelous after the stillness of the mountains. "Smells like coal and yeast," she said softly. Caden smiled. "Smells like people. That's good enough for me." She turned her head to study him. "You're nervous." He grinned faintly. "I've been running from towns half my life. Hard habit to break." They tied the mule outside the courthouse on Larimer Street. The building was new, its bricks pale and clean, but the flag above it hung heavy and faded. Caden helped her down, careful not to touch the still tender scar beneath her ribs. She steadied herself on the step, drew a long breath, and said, "Let's finish this." Inside, the air smelled of ink, oil lamps, and papers too long-handled. A young clerk looked up from his desk. "Can I help you?" Caden set the worn packet of papers on the counter. "Name's Boone. She's Hadley Redding. We've come about a matter of justice. Testimony from Reverend Samuel Cole." The clerk blinked at their trail-worn clothes, then reached for the packet. "Cole, the missionary who served near Taos?" "That's him," Caden said. The man's tone softened. "He was well thought of here. Please, wait just a moment." They waited. The ticking of the wall clock sounded loud as a heartbeat. Hadley stood very still, her fingers tight around the little pine cross she always carried now. When the clerk returned, he was followed by an older man in a black coat, the magistrate himself. His gray hair curled at the collar, and his expression was kind but tired. "You have a statement from Reverend Cole?" Caden nodded. "His last one." The judge broke the wax seal and unfolded the pages carefully. His voice, when he began to read aloud, filled the chamber. Cole's handwriting spoke plain truth. How Captain Hurst had abused prisoners, how Hadley Redding had tried to stop him, how lies and fear had branded her a traitor. He wrote of his own cowardice, his silence, and his final wish to see her name cleared. Hadley listened with her eyes closed, tears running silently down her cheeks. Every word was a memory and a wound, but also a balm. When the judge finished, he folded the pages, set them down, and said quietly, "Miss Redding, in the eyes of this court and of the territory, you are innocent of all wrongdoing. The Army will amend its records. Your honor is restored." The room fell silent except for Hadley's soft sob of relief. The judge rose and offered his hand. "Ma'am, I hope the world proves gentler henceforth." Caden's throat tightened as he watched her shake the man's hand. She seemed lighter, like a weight had lifted from her shoulders that she'd carried so long she'd forgotten its name. Outside, sunlight spilled over the courthouse steps. Hadley blinked against it, laughing through her tears. Free, she whispered, tasting the word. I never thought I'd hear it again. Caden touched the brim of his hat. You earned it, Hadley. She turned toward him, eyes bright. No, we did. That night, they stayed at a mission house on the edge of the city. It was small but warm, with whitewashed walls and a garden already pushing green through the soil. The woman who kept it, Sister Miriam, welcomed them with the gentle firmness of someone used to healing broken souls. Rest here as long as you need, she said, pressing a hand to Hadley's arm. The Lord doesn't rush what he's mending. The rooms smelled of soap, biscuits, and lamp oil. Outside the window, children's laughter rose and fell like bird song. Hadley watched them chase one another across the yard until her smile softened into something peaceful. They're orphans, Sister Miriam said quietly. We do what we can. Sometimes what they need most is someone just to stay. Later, when the lamps were low, Hadley turned from the window to where Caden stood cleaning his rifle. You could stay, you know, she said. He glanced up. Me? They need hands to build fences, chop wood, keep the well clear. I could help Sister Miriam with the children, maybe teach a little medicine. He studied her face, the firelight glinting in her eyes. You're thinking about settling. I'm thinking about living, she said simply. Caden looked down at the rifle in his hands, then set it aside. Reckon I could learn that. The weeks that followed were slow and kind. Denver warmed under steady sun, and grass spread across the yards. The mission school filled with children, some settlers' orphans, some Ute or Mexican-born, all hungry for safety and bread. Hadley worked with quiet joy. She mended skinned knees, taught them to read from her Bible, and sang hymns while sweeping the floor. The sound of her laughter in the hall was proof enough that the past had loosened its hold. Caden took to working the grounds. He built a corral, fixed wagons, dug irrigation ditches. At first he kept apart, unsure of himself among so many voices. But one morning, a small boy named Eli followed him everywhere, asking questions about tools and horses. By evening, 3 more had joined. Within a week, Caden had his own little gang of helpers, and their laughter rang over the yard like bells. He didn't realize how much he'd changed until Sister Miriam remarked, "You smile with your eyes now, Mr. Boone." He rubbed his beard, embarrassed. "Guess I forgot how." "You remembered just in time," she said. In June, a letter arrived from Ruth Lang at the telegraph post. Her tidy script ran straight and true. Dear friends, the lines hum again. Word of the preacher's testimony spread faster than anyone thought possible. You've done a good thing. The Army's new command is reopening old cases and setting right what was twisted. Be proud, both of you. If ever you find the road too quiet, there's always work and supper waiting here. With fondness, Ruth Lang. Hadley read the letter aloud by lamplight. When she finished, Caden said softly, "Looks like the world's listening again." She smiled. Maybe because 2 stubborn souls refused to stay silent. He chuckled. Could be. They hung Ruth's letter on the wall by the door, next to a small wooden cross carved from mountain pine. Beneath it, Hadley had written in neat script, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy." By midsummer, the mission thrived. A garden grew behind the schoolhouse, rows of beans, corn, and marigolds. The bell tower stood straight again, rebuilt with the boys' help. Its tone carried across the fields each dawn and dusk. One Sunday evening, the townsfolk gathered for the first open service. Caden sat near the back while Hadley read from the Psalms. Her voice filled the small chapel, clear and strong. He healeth the broken in heart, and bindeth up their wounds. Caden bowed his head, remembering the night he'd found her in the snow, and felt his throat tighten. The children's voices rose in song behind her, thin and pure. When the final note faded, the hush that followed felt holy. After the service, the congregation spilled into the yard, sharing cornbread and cider under the pink sky. Sister Miriam stood by Caden, smiling. "You look at her the way a man looks at sunlight." He laughed softly. "She near blinded me first time I saw her." "Then don't blink now," Miriam said, eyes kind. "The Lord rarely gives the same gift twice." Later, as the others drifted away, Hadley found Caden repairing the fence near the well. The glow of lantern light painted his face gold. "You missed supper," she said. He shrugged. "Wasn't hungry?" She leaned against the post, watching him work. "You know, I never thanked you proper." He looked up. "For what?" "For not giving up on me when I couldn't stand being touched." He set the hammer down. "Ain't nothing to thank me for. You're the one who kept walking." She smiled gently. "Still, I'd like to." He wiped his hands, suddenly uncertain. "All right." Hadley stepped closer, so near he could see the faint freckles across her nose. She took his rough hand and placed it against her cheek. "See? It doesn't burn anymore." Caden's breath caught. "Hadley." "It heals," she whispered. "That's all it ever needed." For a long moment they stood like that, the world narrowing to the sound of crickets and the slow beat of their hearts. Then he drew her close, careful but sure. The past didn't vanish. It simply lost its power. Autumn brought new colors to the plains. Golden leaves drifted down from the cottonwoods, and the nights turned crisp. The mission thrived. 40 children by harvest time, a new roof on the schoolhouse, and laughter that carried clear to the river bend. Hadley grew stronger with every day. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she would touch the scar on her wrist, not in shame but remembrance. "It's proof I survived," she told Caden once. "Not proof I was broken." He nodded. "I reckon scars are just stories the skin remembers." On the first frost morning, a rider appeared at the gate, a tall woman wrapped in a blanket of woven turquoise and red. Hadley recognized her instantly. "Mariah." The widow of Reverend Cole dismounted, her eyes bright with tears. "I came to see where his truth took root." Hadley embraced her. "You carried his faith farther than he ever dreamed." Mariah smiled through tears. "He always said mercy needed soil. I see it found plenty here." That evening, the bell rang again, and the whole mission gathered under the clear stars. They prayed in 3 tongues, English, Ute, and the simple language of gratitude. When the last amen faded, Mariah took Hadley's hands and placed something small inside them, a thin silver chain with a plain cross. "He would have wanted you to have it," she said. Hadley's eyes filled. "I'll wear it always," Mariah smiled. "Then his voice will never be silent." Winter came gentle that year. Snow dusted the rooftops but melted by noon. The fire in the chapel burned bright each night, and the children hung their drawings along the walls: mountains, stars, horses, rivers. Among them was one sketch that made Hadley stop every time she passed. A man and a woman standing in snow, a blanket around them both, light breaking behind the mountains. One evening after the children were asleep, Caden found her studying it. "Eli drew that?" he said. She nodded. "He said it's what hope looks like." Caden stepped beside her, his voice low. "He ain't wrong." They stood there together, silent before the picture, until she turned to him and said softly, "Do you ever think God uses our brokenness to show other people the way?" He smiled. "Reckon he used mine to bring me to you." She reached for his hand, their fingers interlacing easily now. "Then we'll keep showing the way." Outside, The bell tolled once, long and clear. Its echo carried across the sleeping fields, over the frozen creek, up into the starlit dark, where mountains met heaven. Hadley looked toward the sound, then back at Caden. The same bell that once rang for fear now rings for peace. He nodded, pulling her close. Because you changed its tune. No, she whispered, smiling. Because we did. He kissed her then, slow, reverent, the way a man might touch prayer. The fire popped softly in the hearth. Beyond the window, snow began to fall again. Quiet, forgiving, endless. Inside the little mission, the warmth of mercy filled every shadow. And in that tender stillness, Caden Boone and Hadley Redding found the kind of peace the world can't take back, the kind that endures like the mountains themselves. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.